The radio crackled to life. Wildcat 3 is hit. Wildcat 3 is going down. Lieutenant Commander Jimmy Thatch watched through his canopy as another American fighter exploded into orange flame. The Japanese Zero that killed it rolled smoothly away, untouched, already hunting its next target. That made 3 American pilots dead in under 2 minutes. May 1942, somewhere over the Coral Sea, and the math was brutally simple. American fighters couldn't survive against the Zero. Thatch's hands tightened on his control stick. His F-4F Wildcat felt heavy, sluggish. The Zero that had just killed his wingman was already climbing back to altitude, moving like it weighed nothing. Because it practically did weigh nothing. While Thatch's Wildcat topped out at maybe 318 miles per hour, that Zero could hit 330. While his Wildcat turned like a school bus, the Zero turned like a hummingbird. The Japanese fighter could outclimb him, outturn him, outmaneuver him in every possible way. And there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. This wasn't a surprise. Thatch had known this day was coming for months, ever since that intelligence report landed on his desk back in February. Captured Zero, detailed analysis, performance specifications that made his blood run cold. The report confirmed what American pilots had been screaming about since Pearl Harbor. The Zero was better, not a little better, devastatingly better, and American pilots were dying because of it. Thatch survived that engagement. Barely. But as he climbed out of his cockpit back on the carrier deck, his flight suit soaked with sweat. He couldn't stop thinking about the pilots who didn't make it back. Young men, some of them fresh out of flight training. He was a squadron commander. Their survival was his responsibility. And traditional fighter tactics, everything the Navy had taught for 20 years, were getting them killed. The numbers told a horrifying story. In the first 6 months after Pearl Harbor, Japanese Zeros dominated the Pacific skies. American pilots reported the same thing from every battle. We can't turn with them. We can't climb with them. We can't escape. The problem wasn't courage. American pilots were brave. The problem wasn't training. Many were excellent flyers. The problem was physics. The Mitsubishi A6M0 weighed just 5,300 pounds fully loaded. Thatch's F-4F Wildcat weighed 7,900 pounds. That 2,600-pound difference meant everything in a dogfight. A lighter aircraft could change direction faster. It could climb steeper. It could turn tighter circles. In aerial combat, the tighter your turning circle, the faster you could get your guns pointed at the enemy. And if you couldn't point your guns at the enemy, you died. Traditional wingman tactics made it worse. The standard American formation put fighters in a loose line, spread out across the sky. Each pilot covered the airspace, scanning for threats. When combat started, wingmen were supposed to stay with their leaders, provide cover, watch their backs. But against Zeros, that formation was a death sentence. Here's why. When a Zero attacked, the targeted pilot's instinct was to turn away from the threat, trying to escape. His wingman, flying 200 yards away, couldn't turn tight enough to help. By the time the wingman came around, his partner was already dead. Then the Zero's wingman would bounce the now isolated American. 2 Zeros, 2 dead Americans, every single time. Thatch watched it happen again and again. Good pilots, dead pilots. The weight of command pressed down on him like a physical force. Every morning he briefed his squadron. Every evening some of those chairs sat empty. How many more men would he send to die before someone figured out how to beat the Zero? The answer couldn't be better aircraft. Yes, American factories were designing new fighters, the F-6F Hellcat, the F-4U Corsair. But those planes wouldn't reach the Pacific for months, maybe a year. Pilots were dying now. Today. This week. Thatch needed a solution now, with the equipment they had now. He spent weeks analyzing the problem. The Zero's advantages were fixed. You couldn't make a Wildcat lighter. You couldn't make it turn faster. You couldn't change physics. But maybe, just maybe, you could change tactics. Maybe there was a formation, a maneuver, something that used the Wildcat's strengths against the Zero's weaknesses. The Wildcat did have strengths. It was tougher, more armor, more rugged construction. It could dive faster without falling apart. Its guns hit harder. But none of that mattered if you couldn't survive long enough to use it. Thatch filled notebooks with sketches, diagrams of aircraft positions, attack angles, turning circles. Nothing worked. Every scenario ended the same way. The Zero's superior maneuverability won. The math didn't lie. One evening in late May, Thatch sat in the officers' club at Pearl Harbor. The day's training flights were done. Most pilots had headed to their quarters, but Thatch couldn't sleep. The problem gnawed at him. 3 more pilots lost that week. 3 more families getting telegrams. He sat alone at a corner table, a glass of water in front of him. On the table, a box of matchsticks. He'd grabbed them absently, his hands needing something to do while his mind worked. Thatch pulled out 2 matchsticks. He laid them parallel on the table, about 6 inches apart. 2 aircraft, leader and wingman. Standard formation. He took another matchstick, a 0, and angled it toward one of the American matches. Attack from the side. The American matchstick turned away, trying to escape. The 0 followed, its tighter turning circle meaning it got guns on quickly. The wingman, 6 inches away, couldn't help fast enough. Dead. Thatch reset the matchsticks. Tried again. Same result. Dead. He tried moving the wingmen closer. But too close meant collision risk, restricted movement. He tried wider spacing. Worse, even less mutual support. Every variation ended in disaster. Frustration built. Thatch swept the matchsticks aside, started over. 2 American matches, parallel again. But this time, he moved them closer. Not side by side anymore. He angled them slightly toward each other. The noses pointed inward, creating a shallow V shape. Now, the 0 attacks, coming in from the side. Thatch moved the targeted American matchstick, but instead of turning away from the 0, instead of fleeing, he turned toward where his wingman was, toward the threat. His hand froze. Wait, if the American turned toward his wingman, and the wingman turned toward him, they'd cross paths. The 0 chasing the first American would suddenly fly directly in front of the second American. Perfect gun solution. Easy shot. But that couldn't work. That was insane. Every instinct, every training manual, every aerial combat doctrine said, when threatened, turn away. Create distance. Escape. You never, ever turn toward a threat. That just let the enemy get guns on faster. Except... Thatch moved the matchsticks again, slowly. The 0 attacks American 1. American 1 turns hard toward American 2. American 2 turns hard toward American 1. They cross. The 0, committed to its turn, trying to follow American 1, suddenly has American 2's guns pointing right at it. The 0's wingman attacks? Same thing. American 2 turns toward American 1. They cross. 0-2 flies into American 1's gun sight. Thatch's heart rate picked up. He moved the matchsticks through the sequence again, and again. Each time, the same result. The crossing turn put the attacking 0 in a defensive position. It had to break off or get shot. But it was so counterintuitive. Everything in his training screamed this was wrong. Turn toward the threat? That's suicide. Unless both aircraft did it simultaneously. Unless they trusted each other completely. Unless they flew close enough that the crossing turn happened before the 0 could react. Thatch grabbed a napkin, started sketching. 2 wildcats flying line abreast, about 200 feet apart. Nose slightly toward each other, maybe 15 degrees. When attacked, both aircraft turn toward each other, hard as possible. They cross, nose to tail, like scissors closing. The 0 chasing one flies directly into the other's gun line. If the 0 pulls off, resets, attacks again, do it again, cross again. The 2 wildcats weave back and forth, scissors opening and closing. Each aircraft alternates between being bait and being shooter. Constant mutual support. The 0 can never get a clean shot because there's always another wildcat's guns threatening it. The geometry worked. On paper, with matchsticks, it worked. But would it work at 300 miles per hour, with G-forces crushing your body, with cannon fire tearing through metal, with your life on the line? Thatch looked at the napkin sketch. The matchsticks arranged in their pattern. Could something this simple, this insane, actually save lives? There was only one way to find out. The next morning, Thatch called in his most trusted pilots. He showed them the napkin sketch, explained the concept. The room went silent. "You want us to turn toward the zero?" one pilot asked. "Sir, that's the opposite of everything we've been taught." "I know," Thatch said, "but everything we've been taught gets us killed. This might work, or it might get us killed faster. Either way, we need to know." They started training the next day. 2 Wildcats, flying the new formation. Nose in, tight spacing. When Thatch called the break, both pilots turned hard toward each other. The first few attempts were disasters. Near misses, broken formations. One pair almost collided. They crossed with less than 10 feet of separation. Both pilots white-knuckled on their sticks. But slowly they learned the timing, the angle, the trust. You couldn't hesitate. When your partner turned, you turned instantly, maximally, trusting he was doing the same. Hesitation killed the maneuver. Doubt killed the maneuver. It required absolute faith in your wingman. They practiced for days. Flight after flight. Thatch played the aggressor, diving on them like a zero, testing the defensive weave. The first few times he got through, found angles. But as the pilots refined the technique, it got harder. Every attack brought him into someone's gun sight. Every pursuit put him defensive. The pilots started believing this might actually work. But training flights and real combat were different universes. Against a practice attacker who wasn't actually trying to kill you, the weave felt manageable. Against real zeros, with real bullets, real explosions, real death, nobody knew. Thatch drilled them harder. "When you're in combat, you won't have time to think," he said. "This has to be instinct, muscle memory. Your wingman calls breaking, and your hand is already moving. No thought, no hesitation. Survival depends on it." June arrived. Intelligence reports indicated major Japanese naval movements. Something big was coming. Admiral Nimitz ordered the Pacific Fleet to intercept. Destination: a tiny island called Midway. Thatch's squadron would be there, flying F-4F Wildcats, fighting zeros. And for the first time in history, they'd be using the new tactic, the matchstick solution, the scissors maneuver, the weave. June 4th, 1942. Dawn broke over Midway Island. Thatch sat in his Wildcat's cockpit, engine warming, waiting for launch orders. His wingman, Ensign Edward Butch Bassett, gave him a thumbs up from the adjacent aircraft. They'd trained the weave together. Practiced it until their hands moved without thought. Today they'd find out if it worked. The carrier pitched forward. Launch officer's flag dropped. Thatch's Wildcat accelerated down the deck and leaped into the sky. Bassett followed seconds later. They formed up, nose in, the new spacing feeling natural now. Behind them, more Wildcats launched. The entire squadron flew the weave formation. Radar reported incoming aircraft. Lots of them. Japanese bombers escorted by Zeros, heading for the American fleet. Thatch's squadron climbed to intercept altitude. 12,000 feet. Visibility perfect. And there, coming from the northwest, he saw them. Zeros. 6 of them, flying high cover above the bomber formation. Sleek, deadly, their Hinomaru rising sun insignia visible even at distance. The fighters that had dominated the Pacific for 6 months. The aircraft that American pilots feared above all others. Thatch's radio crackled. "All aircraft engage, repeat, engage bandits." The Zeros saw them coming. 3 Zeros peeled off, diving to intercept. The distance closed. 2,000 yards. 1,500. 1,000. Thatch could see the lead Zero's pilot in his cockpit. Young face. Confident. Why wouldn't he be confident? He was flying the superior aircraft. 800 yards. The Zero's wings lit up. Cannon fire. Tracers arcing toward Thatch. He held formation, trusting Bassett beside him. This was it. This was the moment. The Zero committed, turning hard to get behind Thatch. The classic attack. Get on the American's tail, follow him through his clumsy turn, shoot him down. The Zero pilot had done this dozens of times. Dead Americans littered his wake. But this time was different. "Braking!" Thatch called on the radio. His hand slammed the stick left. Full deflection. Hard as the Wildcat could turn. but not away from the Zero, toward Bassett, toward his wingman. Every instinct screamed this was wrong, but training overrode instinct. Bassett turned simultaneously, right stick, hard turn, toward Thatch. The two wildcats crossed, nose to tail, missing each other by 50 feet. The scissors closed. The Zero, committed to following Thatch, suddenly found itself flying directly in front of Bassett. Perfect deflection, perfect range. Bassett's 450 caliber machine guns opened up, 50 rounds per second. The Zero's lightweight construction, so beneficial for maneuverability, became a liability. Bullets ripped through the engine cowling. The Zero's propeller exploded. The aircraft nosed over, trailing smoke. Pilot bailing out. First Zero down. The weave worked. But two more Zeros were attacking. One came at Bassett from above. Classic bounce. Bassett called braking and turned toward Thatch. Thatch turned toward Bassett. Scissors again. The attacking Zero flew through their crossing point, Thatch's guns tracking it perfectly. He fired. Hits along the wing route. The Zero broke off, trailing fuel vapor, running for safety. The third Zero pilot hesitated. He'd watched 2 attacks fail. Watched the strange weaving motion of the American fighters. This wasn't how Wildcats behaved. Wildcats ran. Wildcats died. These Wildcats were doing something new. The Zero pilot tried a high-side pass, diving from above. Thatch and Bassett wove. The Zero overshot, tried to climb. Found Bassett tracking him. More hits. The Zero's tail shredded. It spun, uncontrollable, toward the ocean below. 3 Zeros engaged, 0 effective attacks. The mathematics had worked. The matchstick solution, tested with wooden sticks on a tavern table, held up under combat conditions where failure meant death. Around them, other Wildcat pairs were weaving. The Japanese pilots, accustomed to easy victories, found themselves defensive, confused. The Americans weren't behaving correctly. They weren't dying on schedule. The Zeros broke off, regrouped, tried again. The Wildcats wove, scissors opening and closing, mutual support, absolute. By the end of the engagement, Thatch's squadron had lost 1 aircraft. 1. Against 6 Zeros, they'd lost 1 Wildcat, and they'd shot down 4 Zeros, with 2 more damaged. The kill ratio had inverted. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, American fighters had dominated Japanese fighters. Word spread fast through the Pacific Fleet. Thatch's weave worked. Actually worked. The tactic was combat-proven, and the results were undeniable. American pilots could survive against Zeros. Within days, every fighter squadron in the Pacific received training on the Thatch weave. Pilots practiced the maneuver until it became second nature. The counterintuitive turn, toward threat instead of away, became standard doctrine. Trust in your wingman became absolute. You turned, he turned, and together you survived. The statistics showed the impact. Before the weave, American fighters averaged 3 losses for every Japanese aircraft shot down. After the weave, the ratio reversed. By late 1942, American pilots were achieving 2-to-1 kill ratios against Zeros. By 1943, with better aircraft like the F-6F Hellcat joining the fleet and pilots flying the weave, the ratio reached 6-to-1. The weave evolved. Pilots developed variations. The beam defense weave, for defending against beam attacks. The high-low weave, using altitude separation. 4 aircraft divisions flying coordinated weaves that protected entire formations. But the core concept remained. Mutual support through crossing turns, scissors motion, always presenting a defensive problem to the attacker. Japanese pilots adapted too, of course. They learned to avoid extended engagements with weaving Wildcats. They developed hit-and-run tactics, boom and zoom attacks that minimized time in the Americans' defensive envelope. The air war evolved into a chess match of tactics and counter-tactics. But the American pilots weren't helpless anymore. They had a defense. They had a technique that worked. Jimmy Thatch survived the war. He eventually reached the rank of admiral, commanding carrier groups and training the next generation of naval aviators. But of all his accomplishments, the weave remained his most significant contribution. That one evening with matchsticks on a table had saved thousands of American lives. Modern fighter pilots still learn the Thatch weave. The specific aircraft have changed, F-18s instead of Wildcats, missiles instead of machine guns, but the principle remains valid. Mutual support. Crossing turns. using geometry and teamwork to overcome an enemy's technical advantages. Flight schools worldwide teach the maneuver that began with wooden matchsticks. The Zero was a magnificent aircraft. Japanese engineers had created something truly impressive. Lightweight, maneuverable, deadly. But innovation isn't just about engineering. Sometimes innovation is a squadron commander sitting alone with matchsticks, refusing to accept that his pilots have to die, working the problem until something clicks. The matchsticks showed Thatch what his mind already suspected. Survival wasn't about having the best aircraft. It was about using the aircraft you had in the smartest way possible. It was about trust, about teamwork, about thinking differently when conventional thinking led to disaster. From a tavern table to the history books, from matchsticks to military doctrine. One man's refusal to accept defeat changed aerial combat forever, and thousands of pilots came home because of it.